Okay, Commissioner, you're live.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is the reporting modifications, and we have Jennifer Hansen here to present those to us. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. There are 4 brand new reporting modification requests today. I am hoping that it would be convenient for 2 of them to be heard together because they are part of the same law firm and their circumstances are the same. And then if you would like to separate them out for the purposes of making your decision, then we could do that if that works.
Sure.
The first one is not part of that 2. The first applicant is Jeffrey Bassett. He is a newly appointed Superior Court judge in Kitsap County, and he is requesting a modification to not list his property for security purposes and safety purposes.
So should we hear them each and then go ahead and vote on them before we move on to the next one, so we remember what we're voting on?
If that is what you've done in the past, if that works, that would.
Any questions with Superior Court Judge Jeffrey Bassett? Is there a motion?
I'll attempt a motion. I move that the commission grant the partial reporting modification as requested by Judge Bassett on the basis that literal application would cause a manifestly unreasonable hardship on the applicant and that a limited modification would not frustrate the purpose of the act.
It's been moved and seconded to grant the partial reporting modification for Jeffrey P. Bassett, Superior Court Judge in Kitsap County. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
The next applicant on the agenda is T. Ryan Durkin, and her request is one that I would like you to consider the facts for, along with the 4th applicant, Michael R. Scott. These 2 applicants are both members of a law firm that previous Commissioner Amit Ronaday is part of. And they're requesting a modification that would exempt them from listing the clients of that particular law firm as literally required. They both provided the information that's required through the modification process in WAC 390-28-100-1EI. They've disclosed the clients that they have done legal work for and the clients, the governmental clients for themselves. Both of them hold the same positions within the law firm. It's slightly different than what Commissioner Ronaday, the position that Commissioner Ronaday held. Commissioner Ronaday had conversations with staff about whether or not these 2 partners in the firm should have requested reporting modifications for the current year or for past years. After that discussion, they opted to go ahead and go forward with a modification request. Both of them have been elected officials and have asked for a retroactive reporting modification request. They both hold titles of Vice President and Director in the law firm of Hillis, Clark, Martin, and Peterson. They have no participation in the day-to-day management decisions, major firm decisions, budget decisions, or changes to firm policy. After discussion with staff, staff was discussing whether or not these particular applicants were actually required to report the clients of the law firm. Instead of continuing that conversation, they both opted to go ahead and provide the information and request modifications, similar to what Commissioner Ronaday had done in the past. The difference between their positions with the firm and Commissioner Ronaday's was that Commissioner Ronaday was involved in that budget information in that policy making. He had a little bit more involvement than they do, but they're asking for a very similar request. If that's enough background, I'll go ahead and read into the record the individual reporting modification requests with the retroactive pieces if you'd like to address them separately. Was there any other questions regarding the circumstances regarding their?
Just a point of clarification, I think both appointed officials, not elected.
Oh, yes, did I say elected? They are appointed, yes, that is correct. Oh,
Well,
yes,
one is selected.
yes. They actually were originally appointed and then they were elected to those positions. So the retroactive piece actually includes the original appointment, the F1 that was filed as an appointed official, and then the subsequent F1s that were required to be filed the next years. Any other questions or clarifications? So for T. Ryan Durkin, she is requesting a modification that includes the current year, so current calendar year of 2015, as well as a retroactive modification request for her original F1 filed as an appointed official in 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. She is a regent with the Washington State University.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion which includes both Ms. T. Ryan Durkin and Mr. Michael Scott. Oh, I'm sorry, one thing. Okay. I'm going to start with Mr. Scott. I move that the commission grant the partial reporting modification. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I apologize. If you want to, would you like to do them at the same time, or do you,
Why don't I go ahead and just do T. Ryan Durkin?
T. Ryan Durkin? Okay.
With respect to Ms. Durkin, I'll move the commission grant the partial reporting modification as requested on the basis that literal application would cause a manifestly unreasonable hardship on the applicant and that a limited modification would not frustrate the purpose of the act.
It's been moved and seconded that the commission grant the partial reporting modification as requested by T. Ryan Durkin, Regent of Washington State University. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? And opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now, Jennifer, if you could move to Michael R. Scott.
Excellent.
I still have it fresh in our minds.
So Michael R. Scott, his request being similar to Ms. Durkin's, although his retroactive modification request only includes the calendar year 2015 and the retroactive piece is the previous 12 months. He was actually appointed in January of 2015, so his first F1 covered 2014, that previous 12 months, so 2 years worth of request. And he is a city council member with the city of Bainbridge Island, originally appointed and then elected in 2015.
Anything else besides that?
No, nothing else unless you had additional questions.
I'll move that the commission grant the partial reporting modification as requested by Mr. Scott on the basis that literal application would cause a manifestly unreasonable hardship on the applicant and that a limited modification would not frustrate the purposes of the act.
It's been moved and seconded to grant the partial reporting modification as requested by Michael R. Scott, City Council Member of City of Bainbridge Island. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Final one?
Thank you. The final request is from Pamela J. Maloney. She is a water commissioner for the Woodinville Water District. She was elected to this office last year, 2015, and this is her annual report. Her circumstance is that she's asking for a modification to not list the business customers of a company that her husband is the owner of. That company is SOAR Technologies, Inc. The only additional information that you might be interested in, and I'll say it in the record, is that when she was elected to this position and she was running as a candidate, she was not aware that this modification request process was available to her. And so she did not request a modification when she ran as a candidate. When I discussed with her the idea of a retroactive piece, I identified that she had disclosed the customers on that original report, and I suggested to her that the commission may not grant a modification request for something that she had already disclosed. So she amended her request to include only the current year. So she did disclose the information last year, but would like to start from this point forward and not disclosing those clients of her husband's business. The reasons for that is because of the competitive disadvantage.
Questions from council or commission?
I just want to make sure, in reading the application, it appears as if what she's asking is only she's willing to disclose the governmental clients, but she wants to not disclose the private clients of her husband's firm.
That is correct. Her original request asked for both governmental and business, and I again explained that the commission didn't typically grant a request for governmental customers, so she amended her request to include just business. That amendment, by the way, is part of that email that was part of your meeting materials.
Okay. I move that the commission grant the partial reporting modification as amended on the basis that literal application would cause a manifestly unreasonable hardship on the applicant, and that a limited modification for this calendar year would not frustrate the purpose of the act.
It's been moved and seconded to grant the partial reporting modification as amended, as requested by Pamela J. Maloney, Water Commissioner of Woodinville Water District for the year 2015. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor and opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Do you know how many more we'll have of these, or are we about through for the year?
Yes, now that we're doing the renewals at the brief enforcement hearing, it should be limited to just new applicants. I imagine that there might be some more after filing week in May, but I think we're nearing the end. I did get a couple, I believe I have 2 new requests that will be heard at the May meeting. This is what we're looking at, is probably about 2, between 2 and 6 maybe per meeting of new ones.
Sounds good. Thank you. We'll move to staff reports and begin with Executive Director Lopez.
Great, thank you. So a couple of things that I'd like to bring up. You'll notice that we put additional time into staff reports so that you'd have some time to discuss this with us. I'd like to go over the strategic plan again, give you an update on our performance development plans, our budget situation, and then follow up on some comments that Senator Roach made this morning regarding an inquiry from the Secretary of State's office. See, sort of everyone's on the same page about that. And I think I will start with the strategic plan. So after our last meeting, I went back over the strategic plan, and I didn't take anything out, but I reformatted it so it didn't look so gigantic. and that's attached to your materials today. I am hoping, well, I guess let me make some preliminary comments about strategic plan. We may not be able to get everything done that's on the strategic plan, and that's okay. It's sort of like a budget that you set at the beginning of the year, and it sets out your best expectations for what's going to happen and how you're going to deal with it. And if you deviate in some manner or something gets done, then that's something to follow up on at the end of the plan to review, was it realistic to try to do this? Shall we carry it over and still try to do it, or were we unrealistic in our expectations? So I would urge you that the size of the strategic plan, it is big. It has a lot of pieces to it. I do think that it is that it contains things that we can do, and that it contains things that are important for us to do. If not within the next period of a year, then we would probably pick it up again after that. So this is really a list of a lot of activities that I think will help bring us into a better place in terms of process improvement activities, and particularly getting feedback on a lot of things. So one of the things I've noticed is that as we go along in these meetings and through other processes or activities, you'll ask, well, what do we know about our regulated community? What does the community think of, let's say, today on the form you talked about that has 3 different things together? It would be nice to be able to know, how do people look at this form? Are they having any trouble using it? We don't really have that data now. We have sometimes anecdotal information on, people seem to have a lot of trouble figuring this out, or they seem to be doing it wrong time and time again. One of the things that's built into this plan is to do that kind of a feedback loop after we do an activity, be it a group enforcement activity or at the end of getting the F1s filed, to see if we can identify any problem areas or areas for improvement. So that's one reason that the plan is as dense as it is. I guess I would open up for your thoughts or comments or discussion.
I think it would be, since we spent a lot of time on this, I think it'd be great just for public understanding if you might take a few minutes about the major categories that we're prioritizing here, and improving the pace of enforcement, and just going through sort of each of the big priorities.
Okay, I'd be happy to. So let me say, to give some context, when I came into this role with the PDC in October, there were a couple of issues that needed some immediate attention. One was that we had a significant backlog of enforcement matters. One was that it seemed to be taking such a long time on some enforcement cases that the outcome was almost irrelevant. So if you have a complaint that in a campaign is not filing its regular reports of contributions and expenditures, even if you do the best investigation in the world, if you don't have the results of that investigation for a year or longer after the election, you're almost irrelevant, because at that point the campaign doesn't exist any longer. The people who are filing the reports may not be around any longer. So there was a definite need to focus more attention on how we were handling our enforcement activities and the timeliness of those enforcement activities. That's one reason why the first goal is that the PDC will ensure that the public and regulated community have timely and professional access to information and assistance through excellent customer service, both in person and online. Now, frankly, this is really more pre-enforcement. This is to make sure people have the help that they need to comply with our laws up front. And I will say our filer assistance group, which is mostly Jennifer and Chip plus Lori as needed, they do an outstanding job providing feedback to people. And so this lets us sort of focus more attention on what else do we need to do, if anything, to provide really good customer support, really good information up front. And this is where the feedback loop will be, where people seem to have difficulty with any of our forms, with any of our processes. Do we have a mechanism in place to find out what that difficulty is and think about what we want to do about it? This also provides a focus for us with our IT activities to make sure that we are getting information available to the public in as timely manner as possible. So that's goal 1. It has several subparts to it. Goal 2 is the PDC will provide effective and impartial enforcement of disclosure laws and will help the regulated community comply. Featured in this are 2 things. 1, the effectiveness of our enforcement requires really timely action on complaints. I have not observed, and I don't believe that there is an issue with the impartiality of the staff. I think one of the hallmarks of our investigations is that they're very thorough, very professional, and very impartial. But we wanted to emphasize that. And we also wanted to emphasize that our goal here is to help the regulated community comply. We really don't want the PDC to become a gotcha tool. We really don't want to see, especially competing candidates in races using PDC complaints against each other to leverage either press coverage or some advantage in the election. We want people to file these reports timely and follow these rules because the goal of all of this is to give voters the information they need to make informed decisions. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in our enforcement team meetings is what's our goal with this one? If the goal is to get people into a compliant framework, that may or may not be furthered through a hearing with penalties. If there's some alternate mechanism we can use to try to get people into compliance to understand what their requirement is, that is something that we focus on. Goal 3 is the PDC will use best practices in order to ensure fair and professional regulation, investigations, and enforcement actions. That's sort of what I've been saying already, but I think the important piece of this is using best practices and building in some formats for both looking at what we do and figuring out what best practices are, but then also that feedback loop of testing that and getting information back from people we regulate. 4 is that the PDC will have the capacity to address emerging trends and issues. This has a bit of an IT focus, well, it's quite a bit of an IT focus. Our IT division has been doing, and frankly, really heroic work on upgrading the applications that some of the regulated community uses. You've seen a demonstration of the lobbyist application that they've been working on, and getting the website redesigned was part of this as well. Goal 5, the PDC will have effective and efficient management systems and public meetings. Part of that is this process for this meeting, how you get information, how we put information out on the website so that the public can see what we're doing and can participate in it as appropriate.
A good part of that is expanding the breadth of input we get on rulemakings where we can, and using new technology to be able to get more folks who maybe not housed in Olympia to be able to participate.
Right. One of the things we've been putting some time and attention into is trying to see what works best, what can be effective in social media. So we make sure we have something on Facebook every day just to engage the community, and then we use Twitter as well to try to put out timely information. I don't know that that has really resulted in any increase in public awareness, but it's one step. And especially when we're thinking about, how do you try to get information out to younger populations, trying to figure out how to make the best use of social media is important. Goal 6 is that the PDC will build on its reputation as active, relevant, customer-friendly, and respected across the state of Washington. A lot of this is, again, taking a look at what we can do to be more effective and then turning that into real action. And that has a piece that's also PR, frankly. When we have good results, we want to share them. When we have things that we're working on, we want to share that and get people's input. We would like to become more relevant. We would like to become more of a tool and resource that everyone turns to when they have questions about elections, lobbyists, and government activities. So that's sort of the context of what we're trying to achieve.
So one of the, okay, it's really helpful, thanks. One of the things we talked a lot about at the sessions we've had on this was in terms of compliance, there are different prongs, different ways to get there. One is to make the system work as well as possible for the regulated community so that enforcement isn't needed and to be helpful in that. And the other is when there is failure to comply, that our enforcement activity gets to, as you were saying, gets to the result quickly, but also that it provides a deterrent and an educational value to the rest of the community. So that's all that we're here. All they're doing right now regarding litigation, which is a huge amount of staff time and work, and I know we'll talk about it in the budget, but so enforcement sometimes goes beyond the decision making we do here, and we talked about the value of participating in those, particularly for the larger cases.
I think that's very true, though. One of the things that I see is I haven't seen too many, I can't think of a situation that I've seen. It may exist, it may well exist, but I haven't seen too many situations where the sort of what I would call the routine complaints that we get, either this person hasn't registered, they haven't filed their reports timely, their reports are insufficient. I haven't seen too many of those situations where it looks like that is an intentional attempt to game the system or gain some advantage. But we do see that, and we have seen that in some of our bigger cases. And those cases really are most appropriately handled by the Attorney General's office, both because they have the expertise and ability to really investigate them thoroughly and engage in really robust discovery, but also because of the penalty limitations. If we keep something here, we have a penalty limitation of $10,000. If something goes to the Attorney General's office, they are not hampered by that. And so that then becomes a really important message for us to share forward in our budget discussions. Because if the Attorney General's office is going to be our effective partner in making sure that the big cases are really robustly dealt with, we have got to have the budget to be able to pay our legal bills. So that's something you'll hear a lot about over the course of the year, and I think that's something we'll be talking about during meetings with legislators as well.
A couple just more points on the future landscape section. In addition to IT, one of the other things we talked about being able to have more capacity to do is look at the future of election law, what's happening out there that's going to impact our ability to be effective, how things are changing, what the expectations are, and what the legal parameters are. And we've talked about sort of having a regular process to be able to get ahead of the curve to the extent I know that's on your list. And then the last point for me, I would say, is on the section about reputation. We might think of wording that a little bit different, because the purpose of that is not, that's an inwardly focused goal, the way that comes across. So the purpose is not to serve the agency. The purpose is to better serve the public. And so maybe shaping that, because it's the only one that kind of comes across in that way.
Well, and that is true. I will say so. I'm open to changing the language with any suggestions you might have. But I will tell you, I am a strong advocate for we have to be strong internally in order to be effective outwardly. So we have to have the systems in place to attract good people, keep good people, give this agency the best, strongest reputation it can have in order for us to be really effective out there.
And understanding that last part, in order to be even more effective, or to serve the public even more effectively. So,
Okay.
right? So that's all. But I think it's terrific, and I really appreciate the work that everybody's put into this.
And I guess my ask would be, and I know that there were some very legitimate concerns about we may have bitten off more than we can handle, and we may have. But I'd like to try it, and I'd like to move forward, and with that, then I would like your approval of the strategic plan. We may have to modify it as we go forward, depending on what happens in our external world in terms of complaints and funding and everything else, that's going to have an impact too. But I think this is a good operating plan.
And our legislative proposals can get some traction this year.
That would be nice. Yeah, that would be really nice.
So I would move adoption of the strategic plan as proposed in this. And slight amendments as discussed.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the strategic plan as presented by Director Lopez. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And I would just like to add good luck, but I know we have more than luck on our side. We have an extreme pool of talent. Appreciate all your work on it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I don't think just shrinking the font size really was.
You know, that was an old trick, you know, try to get a few more words on the page. Yeah. I cut a couple of pages down, but yeah, it's still pretty hefty. The next thing on my list was just to give you a brief update on our performance development plans. As you know, we hadn't had these before. We chose to do them sort of a short 6-month performance development period at first, just to sort of get us used to the process and the cycle. We're about halfway through in April. It ends June 30th. And we've been doing interim meetings with staff, and everything seems to be going pretty well in terms of people meeting their goals. And the hard part of these is always, frankly, at the end when you're doing the written evaluations. But at least so far, we're on track with the process. And then when we do the next cycle, it'll be a 12-month cycle, and that allows for a little bit more time and maybe a little bit more meet on some of the goals.
And it's noted here that we tied now to the strategic plan.
Yes, we didn't have actual plan references in our PDPs this time, but next time the format would be something like, so to give an example, one of the examples that one of our, I think Jennifer has on her PDP is to explore what it would take to do some either online training or videotape training so that people outside the Olympia area can more easily take advantage of it. And normally then we would say this furthers PDC strategic plan, goal number, whatever it may be, so that there's a tie into what we're hoping to achieve in our strategic plan. The next thing I had was budget. If you'll turn to your materials, for the red, just see where, oh, your expenditure report is on page 105. And what this is it's current expenditures. When you see the column on the main page that says July 2015 to February 2016 expenditures, that would show you that we are still in the black in terms of our biennium. The problem is that our budget analyst from DES, who's really terrific, has worked forward, and based upon our spending patterns that he's seen over the last several months since July, he is anticipating that we're going to be deeply in the red by the end of this fiscal year. By June 30th, his projection is that we would be 174,000 in the red. Now, I will admit, I previously thought that was not as horrible an outcome because I thought we looked at things in terms of 2 years. So I was horrified to find out that that does create some very significant problems. We can't be in the red at the end of the fiscal year. We've got to have our budget match up. So what are we doing? Well, we don't have a whole lot of things that we can do internally. What we can do, we have done. So we had planned and have the had the money in our budget to hire an additional front desk person. We're putting that on hold until July 1st. As of July 1st, when we hit the second year of our biennium, we're fine again. But for this couple of months, we are in the red. The largest driver of this situation is that we've had much higher than anticipated legal costs, I believe primarily due to the grocery manufacturer's case. When we refer a case over to the Attorney General's office for investigation and litigation, they still need a client to bill, and we're the client that gets billed. Now, more recently with some of Linda's cases, the Attorney General's has been keeping her time as part of their overhead expenses. One of the things that we're talking about with the Attorney General's office is whether they have the ability to move the grocery manufacturer's case out of our budget and move it entirely onto their books so that they're carrying the risk of that case rather than us. I feel absolutely confident that there will be a recovery, and probably a very good recovery in that case, given the way the court's decisions have gone so far. But I don't know when that might occur. It's certainly not going to happen before June 30th because the case has now been continued until the middle of August. So that is really my strategy on filling this budget hole, is to get certain expenses that we have paid already backed out of our budget again. And I believe that can happen, but we haven't had confirmation from the AGO budget office that they can do that yet.
Could you or Penny, just for the record, remind folks in terms of recovery, even when we do these cases, it doesn't necessarily accrue back to the PDC.
It never accrues back to the PDC. So, with a variation. So when we do these cases, even with the small penalties that we impose during our hearings, those all go to the state general fund. So the penalties, and in the grocery manufacturer's case, there's a potential, if the state were awarded all of the money that the grocery manufacturers spent on the initiative before without reporting it, that's $13 million. If the state were getting treble damages, that could be upwards of, $45 million. So there could be a really big state recovery in that case, but it won't come back to the PDC. It goes to the general fund. Now, we can, in those cases, and we have in like the two SEIU cases where we've settled them, we have included a provision to pay back our investigative costs and our legal costs. So some monies have come back into our budget from those settlements. And I think $19,000 on one case and about $10,000 on another. But right now, the recoveries that have come in are really insignificant compared to the costs that we're putting out. Our last month's budget for the Attorney General's office was $86,000. So we've been spending a lot of money. It's money really well spent. I mean, these are really important cases and we're getting terrific assistance and representation, but it comes at a cost. And our budget just wasn't built to withstand that.
Right, and a better practice regarding enforcement would be to get some statutory change to allow recovery, at least a portion of recovery, to use that to then beef up enforcement.
I think so. I think, it's looking forward, I think we need to make some changes to our penalty recovery, but that requires statutory change. So to me, it's sort of a this or that. If we could have more ability to bring funding back into the agency, then we'd be in a better position budget-wise. If we can't get that, then we really need our budget to be more realistically allocated so that we can cover the costs of these cases, because they're very important to the citizens of the state. Any questions about budget?
Yeah.
Yeah, a few?
So we're right as of today, or at least as of the date you generated this report, we're in the red, it's hard for me to read this, 174,000.
Projected to be in the red.
Projected.
Yes,
And we have 2 months to change that.
yes.
So Commissioner Levinson, how's your 401k?
Yeah.
wanna just shovel it?
Well, this is, in a strange way, and I don't at all mean to make light of this because it keeps me awake at night, but it's almost becoming such a big number that it's not solvable by us. And that's why, we really are working with the Attorney General's office, and I do think that that's the answer to our budget. At this point, with this type of projection, it's not something where you can take a few furlough days and make it up out of your staff, which is what the agency has had to do in the past.
Well, and I think we've all been clear, if the ramification of this is having to further delay other enforcement action, that is not what we want to be doing. But we have such little discretionary income in this agency that our choices are going to be pretty limited here now. So if we as commissioners can help in terms of talking to the AG or the governor's office, budget office, please let us know.
I will definitely.
Really, it's just a matter of carrying costs right now in this.
It's one of those great ironies, it's not, it's all one giant pile of money, the state of Washington. And it's just how you divide it up. So there is money that's going to come back into the state of Washington, and it's just the accounting is that the costs of that are coming out of our account right now, but they don't need to. They can come out of a different account.
Only other irony is that we're responsible for those costs, but we have no authority to shape them. Once it goes to the AG's office, they do what they have to do, and I'm grateful they do it.
Mhm.
But we have no control over those costs,
Right.
and yet it's coming out of our budget.
It's actually, the AG's office is in a similar predicament with us. They don't have any independent, they're not given, a budget of X number $1 million up front the way a state agency is. They're told you have the authority to bill clients to get your costs back. So I'm reasonably confident that we can work something out with them. But yeah, it's really, to my mind, sort of a flaw in the system of how these things are set up.
So if we don't look at the AG line, there's other red lines there too.
There are other red lines, so
How are, those are projected.
projected.
Do you think that that's where your projections would have them, or?
To a certain extent, yes. So, like on the line for computer information services, that's the second on the list, we're projected to be 100,000 in the red. That's really a budgeting issue. We received $100,000 in our budget to do the upgrade to the web design, and in retrospect, we were not very careful about how we placed that money in our budgets. We put $50,000 into this year and $50,000 into next year, and yet all of our costs came out this year. So I think that projection is accurate, but it doesn't really reflect any sort of real overrun. It's more that the bills are due now and the money is split 50-50.
Then that would only be a $50,000.
Yeah, I'm not sure why why it's set as $100,000. Because if you look at the April expenditures, estimated are $50,000, that's to carry out the rest of our contract with Portland Web Works. The May expenditures are expected to only be $11,000. So I'm not sure why they're saying $100,000 projected in the red. On the other goods and services, the Attorney General's office is the big one. That's projected $247,000 in the red. The rest of them are ones that have minor fluctuation. Data processing services are projected to be $6,000 overspent. Travel is expected to be about $3,600 overspent. But if we didn't have the Attorney General costs, I think the rest of them could be very easily managed. There's one line up higher underneath computers, the other professional services, that nothing's projected in April, May, or June. That is the result of having the overlap of Fred Kiga with me when I came on, and also keeping Susan Harris on for a longer period of time to help us with our enforcement matters. So again, I think that was money well spent, but where everything is very tight, that is an over expenditure.
But that was in the direction of the commission
Oh.
to get us,
Sure.
so we accept responsibility.
Okay, very good. Well, I mean, really, this is an agency that spends its money very carefully. There's not a whole lot of anything going on in terms of spending. So it's really just the litigation that's driving us. And it's not, the grocery manufacturer's case is special because it's a really big case. We've had to have a lot of travel and other expenses, but we have other cases of litigation too. And it's just very difficult to balance that on a small agency budget.
Anything else?
Okay, I have one more item and then I'll turn it over to the next staff report. This is just the question that came up this morning from Senator Roach indicating that there was a lot of discussion out in the regulated community, I guess I would call it the regulated initiative community, on some guidance that we had provided indicating that on the petitions, the paper petitions that everyone goes out to get signatures on, should have sponsor ID information on them. The rub is that most of the initiative petitions do not have sponsor ID information on them, and the initiative sponsors had not previously been informed that they should have that. And so apparently there's a certain amount of emotion about whether that is required and how can the PDC require it now when no one knew to do it in the past. And I would reiterate what I said to Senator Roach this morning, that is, this is not something that is an enforcement matter that we're taking up. This is a discussion that has occurred between our office and the Secretary of State's office. And what at most we would be doing is using this election cycle to look at that issue and determine whether the commission needed to issue some guidance in the format of an interpretation or something else on the issue of what initiative petitions are and what type of sponsorship or other requirements were implicated in those petitions. She indicated that I should send a letter out to the initiative sponsors clarifying that, and I will do some research into what is going on. And if a letter is necessary, I will write a letter to them, letting them know that we're not going to be doing enforcement actions every time a petition doesn't have sponsorship information on it.
Has this issue come up in past election cycles?
I think I'll ask Lori that. It's the first I had heard of it, but I don't know what the past discussion has been.
I know we've had the question in the past about whether or not initiatives would fall under the definition of political advertising. And the answer has always been yes. As far as giving specific information to initiative sponsors, we haven't gone out every year to figure out who the initiative sponsors are to make sure that they know what the requirements are. I had a discussion on last Friday with the Secretary of State staff who said that they would include the information in the materials that they give to initiative sponsors going forward.
So, and just for the record, when we say initiatives, we mean all petitions, so referenda.
It's initiatives to the people. It's the petitions to gather signatures for initiatives to the people, not initiatives to the legislature.
But it could be a referendum as opposed to an
Yes.
initiative. All right.
That's all I have for the executive director report.
Any other questions for the executive director? So many questions, so little time. We'll move on to compliance.
All right. Well, Jacob is going to come up to help with that, but you could come up to Chad's position here. You have our updated enforcement matter report. We are down to, I think, 23, it's either 22 or 23, but I think it's actually 23 active matters because we're anticipating opening a staff-generated complaint against the Whatcom County Republican Party that stems from our investigation into the state Republican Party and some earmarking questions that had come up regarding election in several years ago. I think it was 2013. So we were able to get rid of one matter, but it generated another matter that we want to do some looking into. So you have that list. I would say things are making generally pretty good progress. There are a couple of matters that I need to follow up on next week to come up with some problem solving ideas on how to more effectively move them forward. But most of them are making pretty decent progress toward either a brief hearing or eventual formal hearing. If you have any questions about those matters, we'll address them, and then Jacob's going to give you some information on group enforcement.
And I have a little handout.
I want to reinforce something that came up in the brief adjudicative proceeding this morning, which is I think it would be helpful to have as a protocol for investigations that the staff are looking at whether the respondent is in compliance in total, across the board with the PDC. So while the complaint may be just about X, as part of that investigation, we should be providing the commission an assessment of whether the respondent is otherwise in compliance or whether there are other violations that warrant attention at the same time.
I think we can definitely look at that. I think that the staff tends to look at, what's going on with this particular campaign or this particular candidate or committee. And I'm sort of thinking to Mr. Perkins' answer to your question this morning. Since we haven't, we don't really have a mechanism in place for sort of actively monitoring all campaigns, and I doubt we ever would have that. But you may have a situation where someone is being looked at because of a complaint for an enforcement activity, and that's it. But I think it is helpful to be able to answer questions such as, yes, since this time, this campaign has filed all of their reports timely, or actually since this time they have missed a few deadlines. So we can definitely, I think, give you sort of the updated information on what they look like.
Right, because for me, we're in the position of adjudicating on these. If there's other information that shows lack of compliance, I don't want to be making a decision in the absence of that. And if we're going to then order penalty and say that it will be suspended upon continued compliance, and in fact, at that moment in time, that are not in compliance.
Let me do a little thinking on that though, because so here's a thought that occurs to me that it could be a problem. If the person has never been notified that there's a problem, and they haven't been charged with this, and they haven't had an opportunity to present their side of the story. So I need to think about what you can take that into consideration for.
And that's why I'm saying that my preference would be the investigation looks at that up front when they're doing the initial scan, so that the report of investigation isn't just going down this path when we have a bucket of information that's not.
Okay. So let me think about how we can work that in and still, preserve the sort of administrative procedure protections that they need.
So the handout is two parts. The top part is in regards to lobbyist group enforcement that we have initiated for January and February of 2016. And then the lower part is just some bigger compliance division numbers. In regards to the first part, This information is gathered from a report that I ran on April 4th to mail the warning letters to lobbyists, and then subsequent reports after that. From the April 4th report, there were 839 lobbyists in the state of Washington. Those lobbyists represented 2,085 different groups or lobbyist employers. Some of the lobbyists represent a couple different employers, so of that 2,085, there's 1,387 unique lobbyist employers in the state. On the 5th of April, 186 warning letters went out to lobbyists who had failed to file for either January or February, or who were on the list for an employer that they may have terminated, but we didn't know about that. By the 13th, we had already had 69 tickets created in our case management system in response to the letters. And since then, all of those tickets have been closed and only 3 remain. And they're mentioned later on in the paper.
So I'm sorry, so the 30 tickets open as of 4/13 is now down to 3?
Yes. Yes.
And when we send them warning letters, do they go to the lobbyist employer at the same time? Does the letter go to the employer?
That's a separate, this is for the lobbyist monthly expense reports, the L2s. And then the L3 enforcement's gonna happen later. And that's
Sorry, I'm sorry, I'll ask the different way. If we think a lobbyist is in violation, are we notifying his or her employer of that possible?
Not at this point. At this point, the warning is, it looks like you haven't filed your reports. Please file your reports. Send us an email if you think we've got something wrong. Or it may be that you have filed reports, but the reports are not complete. Now, once we have gone through this process and we get down to a group of truly non-compliant lobbyists, then we would set, a hearing process for them. Even then, I don't think, and Kurt may know, I don't think we have notified their employers that the lobbyist is not in compliance.
That's correct, we hadn't done that. When we're doing the L3 enforcement process, we will contact the lobbyist and let them know that one of their employers hasn't filed. Can you help facilitate that? And they will reach out and help with the process. But as far as the penalty of one, we haven't notified, either the employer or the lobbyist of that fact.
So we could look at that, but it might be a bigger scoping than we're quite set up for. At notifying, let's say, dear Boeing, you might want to know your lobbyist hasn't filed the reports with us.
And not, obviously not too early, because we want to help people comply. We're not looking to get people in trouble, but to the point where we're starting to have to then proceed with enforcement action, it would seem like if the employer can help ensure that the lobbyist gets in compliance, then that would save a lot of staff resources to have to go through the enforcement action.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, something that we can look at. That's our next point in this process is, okay, now we've done the warnings and gotten quite a few into compliance. Now what does our little population look like? Who are they? And what are they doing? So that would be a piece to factor in.
Similarly to the way we've talked about with the elected officials, notifying their school board presidents and those sort of things. This is a way to help get compliance.
And then, so moving forward, after we sent the letters, as of April 22nd, we had 24 lobbyists who filed missing reports. We have had a further 20 that terminated registrations that they had either forgotten or left off the form. And then about a group of 20 more, there was some kind of internal system mistake where a data element was missed or something like that before the letters were sent. And we're still catching up on some of the L2s that arrived during April because we did have the F1 filing on April 15th, and so there could be more that are now in compliance because of this.
And of the list of some of the non-compliant folks are maybe executive directors of a nonprofit or a charitable organization who registered for a 2-year biennium they may be registered or lobbied for the first 3 months of the first session and haven't done anything since. We've got a fair number of student lobbyists that represent people like University of Washington, Western Washington, Washington State University, and what have you, that they file during the session. Their name still shows up as a registered lobbyist. They may not know to terminate. They most likely have graduated in June of last year, and they've got a new student that would be representing them this year that are on the list. So there is some intuitiveness that's taken into account, and Jacob's working through that process now.
And we'll, once we get to the enforcement phase of this, when we send out the hearing notices, we will look at the list to see who is really out of compliance. The next part of the list is numbers in regards to the compliance group and the Fresh Desk case management system. For the entire agency, I went back to January 1st of this year, and agency-wide, we created 2,179 tickets in the Fresh Desk.
Explain what that means.
What that is,
Don't use this language.
right,
The real world.
so exactly. What that is it could be anything. It could be an inquiry. It could be somebody letting us know that they filed. Anything that goes to PDC at pdc.law.gov goes through there. So a lot of that is going to be outreach stuff, reminders, things like that. People responding to reminders. That's why that number is so big. For the compliance group, we have processed 280 of those tickets. And right below that, you can see that we've closed 259 of those. A lot of those are inquiries. I have a campaign. I want to put up a sign. What needs to be on my sign? I think they might be doing something wrong. This is what I'm seeing. Is this wrong? Inquiries. Of the ones that are, and the other thing too is every time a complaint is filed, that gets created as a ticket. And then if there's a case that resulted from that complaint, that gets a second ticket.
It does.
Yes.
We have some double counting.
Yes, it is a little different though. The interactions we have with the complainant are different than what we have with the respondent. And so we do have 21 that are open, and 10 of those are for failure to register or report as a committee. 6 are for the use of public facilities for electioneering purposes. The 3 that I mentioned above are still open for lobbyist group enforcement. We're just seeing where there may have been an issue. And then 2 are open for multiple alleged violations of RCW 4217.
And just to add Evelyn's earlier comment about the Whatcom County Republicans, I posted that to the website last night after I notified the chair and got him the information. So that is on the website today and will be included into the total where you said it might be 22 or 23. So,
And then of the 22 or 23, we have 12. They're expected to go to hearing over the next couple of months. One was a brief case that you heard this morning, and we have another one this afternoon. And we're looking at setting up some brief hearings for May and possibly out into June. And today's hearing will be the oldest ticket that we have in the Fresh Desk system.
Can't tell you how satisfying it is to knock off one of these old ones and just clear it.
You're feeling
Yes.
Yeah.
So in May, you're expecting a matter to come to the full commission, or what is this reference to up to 3 additional? Is that 3 additional full commission members? Or
No, I don't think so. I mean, we wouldn't have the capacity to do that. One, I know we'll have a report to the commission. One will have stipulations to present to the commission. What's the third one?
For brief,
Yeah, no, for the full that you're talking you might be up to. There was one we're waiting on the Whatcom County, one that was a 45-day letter that we thought we might be able to get scheduled and back to the commission, but I think that's unlikely. We're gonna have to work with the other parties, the prosecuting attorney's office schedule. So I'm not sure what the other third potential one was.
we will have a request for a reconsideration from a February full commission hearing, but that wouldn't be considered into that. So I think there's just going to be two.
I think there'll be two. And they're short ones, things where the Kurt's actually spent a lot of time negotiating, so we'll have something packaged up for your consideration, but we won't require a full hearing.
And we still have the Holton matter, which is also back a
June,
few years old.
Yeah. That's scheduled to come in June, and we're, working with the parties on that one to package it as best we can.
Anything else?
That's it, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk about the penalty tracking button.
Whatever questions you have on the penalty tracking, but I'll probably ask Jana to answer them.
No, it wasn't questions, it was in terms of going forward, how we're going to start addressing some of this. And what our technology will allow us to do going forward.
So that's probably between Jana and James with that information.
So one of the reasons we requested this information was to make sure that we're following these cases through to conclusion. And once the order gets issued, if there's not compliance, then there's more work to be done. And whether our technology would now allow us to set up a process where you all would be notified very quickly when we get to a date where compliance was, where the penalty was due. And then we have clear deadlines for the steps that follow that. And for referral to collection, so how long we take to refer to collections, what steps we take before we refer to collections, do we notify again the entity with whom this person, so the council president or the caucus leadership in an effort to try to get these resolved.
I can tell you what we're doing right now. And I just was looking at the report I gave you and the cases in 2016. If you look, those are the ones that have recently been paying. They paid quickly compared to the ones in 2015 and previous. My point being that the process that we have in place right now, even though it's new, I believe it's actually working. What happens is when an order goes out, it's distributed. The person that is the investigator or the person that did the presentation here sends me an email. I'm sorry, that's not true. They give the order and they give the information to our scanning area. And they scan the order, which then they give the order to me. It starts my process. I have a spreadsheet right now because we haven't really developed any other way to track it right now. A spreadsheet that has the order information in it, how much they owe, what they were penalized, just the basics. Once those are generated, I send that on to my contact at DES. DES and I have come together and we've created a spreadsheet that we can both use and pull information from. DES sees that order date. The spreadsheet I created triggers the 30-day automatic due date, which is also what's established on their orders. DES uses that penalty due date then to go, it triggers them to say, okay, they haven't paid, it's the 22nd of April. So now let's send our first invoice out. So there is stuff in place that triggers when the next invoice goes out and when the next one goes out. DES has been really good in communicating with me if they have a false address. A lot of them have been typos back and forth, so that's something that we need to kind of look at. But I really think that this shows how effective it's been
Well,
this year.
right, but that isn't, so help me understand or help us understand then all of these ones where there's not been any compliance, what's the strategy with the ES?
So the ones in the past years. We actually have had some response, not happy response, but we've had response. We've actually been able to reach these people. They too we basically started all over again with it, is what we did. Because in the past we had sent everything off to Alliance One Collection. So what we decided to do with DES here is even though those penalty due dates were way past due, let's start with a trigger. They've obviously been sent that order. And so they sent the first invoice out, the second and the third. Most of these are probably not coming to the end of their third invoice. And we have been starting to get responses back. I know Kurt's been getting calls, I've been getting calls, so I think it's still new to figure out what the next steps are. Let's see what these steps do. And maybe how much in the next month is actually triggered and paid. But we are building this again. I mean, it's something that used to be in place a long time ago, and we're just kind of rebuilding the steps.
I think there's the potential for, someone who ignores the DES invoices and then will have a debt owed that is older. And what we do about that is going to be another discussion issue, because at that point we'll have to weigh how much money do we want to invest in an action to get the amount of money
An
owed.
example would be the individual on the very first page at the bottom. Case, yeah, there's one of many of the individual on here. You won't get a response. So that's a good example of what do we do then.
Kurt, you have any comment?
Yeah, the process was I was doing collections last year. We did group enforcement in July and August that probably are the majority of the cases on these lists. Because of the case backlog, sending out the collection letters weren't the highest priority for my work. So no collection letters were sent out for either after the 30 days for the July brief enforcement hearings or the August, and then subsequently some follow-up in September. So DES is now doing this and taking all of those cases and starting to do the first collection letter and the second collection letter, and we're getting a lot of good responses, and they're good at tracking down addresses. So Jana's done a great job on kind of taking over this project, and it's taken a lot more of her time than we envisioned, and it's taking a fair amount of my time too, and I know James as well. So I think our process is much more solid. It's a lot more regimented. It's going to be fine-tuned and tweaked a little more, but we're way ahead of where we were last year, and I see that it's getting a good handle on it going forward from this point.
I think I would just ask if you would give us maybe another month to run the cycle, then I can come back and be able to say, okay, this is what we're doing with those that we can't reach.
And as you do that, when you come back, if you guys can talk to us about, is it possible to use our technology? Do we have the capacity in our systems to do more automated? Both two things. One is the flags that something is due or overdue. And second, we had talked to one point about maybe we want to post on the website a list like such as this of overdue that people can search, and you can identify who still owes, how much is outstanding, what their office is that they hold. So the same that we try to do with all the rest of our disclosure, make it as robust and transparent as possible. If you want to be able to search whoever owes more than $500 or who's ever in Spokane County, whatever that you can be.
James has built in penalty fields on the website, so we can post the information of what has been assessed and what is suspended and what's owed. But how searchable is that? I don't have to know.
Yeah, so that's the other side of the equation, and I'll start by saying that DES handling the accounts payable side of this is really wonderful and something they do well, and we should let them continue to do that. The disclosure and transparency side of it is the part where then we can leverage some of our technology to do that. And so that was one of the things that we just added in on the case tracking that's available to the public, is to add penalty fields. And so we're still doing a little tweaking. Jana started entering some data into those. And then I came to her yesterday and said, how many did you do? Because I want to wipe them all out and do them again. Unfortunately, we had just gotten started. So that we can get them formatted so they come across a little bit better. So we'll start getting the data in there, which of course is the first step. There's lots of opportunities to then start figuring out what kinds of reports we want to have, and how to give people access to those without also making them learn how to use some complicated system to find things as well. So we're setting ourselves up in a good position to then do some of that kind of reporting, so that one, they'll be there. So if somebody's interested in a particular case, you can go find the case and you can see, have they paid, how much were they supposed to pay, and we included whether or not there was any suspended penalty, whether or not any amount of that was reinstated, a field to put notes about either the suspension or reinstatement, as well as the individual payments and the dates that those payments were made. So even for somebody that has a penalty, they'll be able to go and look at their case and see, great, the PDC recorded that I made this payment and I can see my balance going down, or I can see my balance at zero. So all that's in place, and we're setting ourselves up in a good position to do the reporting.
At this point, I'm the reinstater. I'm the monitor, so that's, I guess that answers part of your question. Right now, the way this is set up, I'm the one that was like, that would say, okay, you missed the payment, we need to reinstate this amount. And that is in the spreadsheet, if you were to scan the report they give you, you'd see all the other columns that trigger and that I created that formulate come out with who owe money now. And yeah.
Anything else for compliance? Now we'll move on to James.
So the big news, of course, for this month is that on the 11th, as planned, we have a new website. And I'll just say that of the 20 whatever years I've been in this business, this was one of the smoothest rollouts that I've experienced. It went extremely well. The vendor that we hired did a great job in getting things prepped up for us, and was working over the weekend even before we went live to make sure that everything was ready and worked smoothly. And then Lori and the rest of the staff here did a great job in also contributing to that. So it went super well. Nobody was running around the office trying to fix things that weren't discovered, and any chaos. It just turned on and worked great. We've gotten a little bit of feedback. We put a place where people could submit comments to us, and we've gotten 10 responses via that feedback mechanism. 7, we asked a question, were you able to find what you were looking for? Of those 10, we got 7 no's and 3 yeses. And the no's are very important to me. At the same time, a pretty good balance there in that somebody who can't find something is a lot more likely to look for the opportunity to say I can't find it than the folks that are able to find things. And we've been able to use that feedback. And so one of the ones that we got a question about was, well, why can't I print out an entire manual like I used to rather than having to page through it? And so that's something that we'll have probably in the next few days, a link to say, print the whole manual all as one big chunk. And those are the kinds of things where we had a discussion early on about, well, do people really print big bodies of text anymore, or do they just want to look it up when they need it? And so we decided to leave it off, but there's a need and it's really easy for us to do, so we're going to add that one back in. We're updating the way the calendar displays. Right now it always displays as a calendar, but as of Monday, we'll have a list view option. So if you don't want to look at it in a calendar grid format, you can have a list that just shows one thing after another, and you could filter it down to say, well, just show me the list of reporting due dates, for example. And that came from one of those pieces of feedback that we got as well. And then another one about how we were sorting the candidates. And then another one was just about finding the advanced search features. And I'll bring that one up because I think it really highlights the power and flexibility of the system that we implemented. Back in the dark days before April, just doing something like changing or adding a button would have meant going to IT and asking to have some work done and whatever amount of time it took. And instead, Lori went and logged in and changed what one of the buttons said or added one and changed what it pointed to, and it probably took her less than 5 minutes to do. And there it is. The website works better for the customer that's on the end. So I think that really highlights the power of the system that we've implemented. Just to give you a little idea of what's been going on. A typical day, we get about 20,000 web page views. So someone loading a page in their browser, about 20,000 per day. On the 11th, people knew that we were getting a new website, and we had 61,000. So there are people that are interested in the fact that we had a new website. So that was pretty nice. And probably people that went, wow, look, something new, and took some time to browse around the site. One of the interesting pieces of feedback that came out of that was the links to search the database. You used to have to navigate down through the menus to get to a point, and now we just have, it's one click and we drop you in a particular spot. Well, we drop you at the spot that shows a graph and an overview, and somebody commented something to the effect of, this is really wonderful that you've added this chart here. I really like it. That's been there for, I don't know how many years, but it was kind of hidden. So that also shows you that we're hopefully helping people to get to interesting parts of the information that we have, and maybe getting them a little bit excited about the things that we're doing. And things are performing well. The system's been really reliable so far. This has been one of the big kind of extra benefits of hosting this system outside of the PDC, is that we get then the scalability and reliability. So going from our normal 20,000 pages to 60,000 pages wasn't even a hiccup. Been doing some looking at the search results, because we're now tracking the terms that people are using to search. We're not getting a lot yet. We've only been tracking actually for about the last 8 or 9 days, so the tracking wasn't on for the first few days. The most widely used search term is the number 23. And I have absolutely no idea what that
Yanking your chain.
I'm not quite sure why that one was in there, but there were only 15 searches for that. The numbers are pretty low, but Lieutenant Governor is pretty popular, as well as Mike Winkler, Orca, Contribution Limits, and Aaron Jones. And there's a lot of individual names in those results. It may be folks searching for their own records, or it may be somebody searching for something about someone else. But I think that really interesting and nice thing that comes out of seeing that behavior is that in the old site, if you wanted to know if there was an enforcement matter regarding an individual, you couldn't find a whole lot unless you browsed through all the cases looking specifically for that person's name. Or if you wanted to find out information about a campaign, you'd have to go into the search the database system and filter on the person's name and look specifically for that campaign. In the new website, you can go to the search box right at the top and type Aaron Jones. And if Aaron Jones shows up in an enforcement matter, or Aaron Jones shows up as a candidate registration, or any place else on the site, then you'll get a result for Aaron Jones. And so seeing that people are using the site in that way, searching for information about individuals, I think really helps us understand how important that just show me everything you know about is to our customers. And then just the last thing is that in the next few days, we're doing a few more little styling changes. The vendor team is still working, putting little minor tweaks in place. We're going to be adding all of the past cases, the ones that are prior to our new case management system. We're going to be adding all of those in so they show up in the same way to the public as the current cases do. And those are going to have the penalty information and all that carried forward with those also. Back to 2010. So for the 6 years that we have retention on. And let's see, was there any, I think that was it in terms of things that I wanted to highlight. Any questions about the website or anything else?
I just gotta congratulate you guys, it's a tremendous job. I know it's a priority for everybody. It's great to see. Be really interested to, every couple of months, get these reports on what people are struggling with still and how they're using it, and whether it matched our expectations about what people were looking for.
Yeah, I think we're going to get a lot of really useful information out of looking at the search terms and understanding how people are using the site.
And are you getting a lot of calls of people asking for help? Or?
I think
Chip and Jennifer are fielding some calls, and we've had some discussions about what's the go-to response, which is just use that search feature, because James and his team spent a lot of time making it a faceted, robust search option, and I think, I haven't heard them tell me otherwise, that really is, you know, the answer. And in fact, you asked me a question, Commissioner Levinson, one time, and I should have said, use the search feature. The question was, how do I find out who's running for judge this year?
No, it wasn't my question, I was telling you the user
Right.
was struggling. But, what he had said too was, it was, when you search for judge, it doesn't show justice, or vice versa, or something like that. So he wasn't getting a full report about who's running, because those terms are slightly different.
And knowing that we can make that match happen, actually.
I told him he had to come down and testify.
Frankly, I think the lack of response, I'm taking that as a win, because this is the third website at the PDC, and it was much quieter than the other launches that generated a lot of unhappiness.
Anything else, or should we turn it over to Lori for the customer service report?
So I was just going to quickly tell you that we're moving on to our next big project as an office, and that's getting ready for May filing week. It happens May 16th through the 20th. That's when all the candidates go and file to get their names on the ballot. And there's a lot of partnership activity between our office and the Secretary of State's office, who receives all of those declarations. They provide the information to us, telling us who has filed, so that we can let them know about their disclosure requirements. So there's that outreach segment, and then a little bit further along in the process, we give them links directly into the database for a particular client that they embed in their online voter templates.
I was gonna ask you about that, because I think maybe it was you, the CL Ethics and Elections embedded links are no longer working, because they go to our old website.
Okay, we can make sure that,
So if we have embedded links with Secretary of State or other places, we might.
thank you. That's really what we're gearing up towards now, and everything else was in my written report, if you have any questions.
You said you were receiving a high volume of requests for personal finance statements. Is that higher than normal for this time of year on an election cycle, or?
I think it's pretty normal. Excuse me. Number one, we're getting a lot of requests because it's time, we just passed the deadline where people file their annual statements and they don't have a copy of what they've submitted in the past. They're not online because they have sensitive information. And so we track that production just like any other request that we receive for records. The other reason we're getting a lot of requests now is it's because that it's even year number election coming up, and there's a very close majority in the Senate, and there's a lot of opposition research being done, and candidates who, you know, they're thinking about running and they want to see what people have reported on their finance statements, and so, you know, lots of reasons why. And I think the third category that of requests we're getting for F1s is the jurisdictions. You mentioned the school board earlier, Commissioner Levinson. They've just come to us to make sure that all their people have filed, and they ask for copies in case they get requests for them.
So did you find with the IRS extension that filers felt like they had an extension to Monday also?
Hopefully filers don't compare us to the Internal Revenue Service.
So
we
it's
hope
always the same thing.
we want to be considered a little bit, you know, a more friendly agency to deal with. But I don't think that created any confusion amongst our filers. We did a lot of outreach, mostly CHIP, letting people know that the filing deadline was coming up. As I explained in my written report, there was a series of emails, and then if we didn't have a good email address, people were sent a postcard telling them that they had to file and when the filing date is. And, we've gotten between 85 and 90% compliance at this point, and they're still trickling in, so that's great.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. And at this time, we'll move into executive session. Discussion of matters allowed in executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, including but not limited to discussion of enforcement matters pending and potential litigation with legal counsel and review of performance of public employees. Possible action regarding pending litigation or other matters properly discussed during executive session will be taken following the executive session. We will return approximately 1:00.
And Ms. Lovelace, congratulations, I think there are more pages in this commissioner packet.